Hi, in this class what we will see is the capital structure and how it influences the value of a project or the value of the company. Previously I've said that we were ignoring the financing cash flows, but actually the way you split between debt and equity, the way you structure your capital will influence the value of the company. Because the more debt you have, the more effects there will be in the value of the company. And there will be both positive impacts and negative impacts. So now let's write here the positive impacts of debt. The first one is that debt is cheaper than equity. So debt here has a lower cost. So it is easier to access debt and it is cheaper to have debt. Debt holders face less risk than equity holders. Debt holders have their payments predetermined. The coupon payments, for example, are already determined from the beginning, while shareholders will receive dividends, which are more uncertain. They depend on the results of the company. So there is much more risk to equity holders, so they will require a higher return. So if we use debt, we will be using a cheaper source of financing and it is easier to get. Then there is also a positive impact, which is leverage the return of equity holders. So we are able to have more assets for the same amount of equity. So if you compare a company without debt and a company with debt, the one with debt is able to get more assets, and with more assets it is easier for the company to generate profits for the shareholders. So by having that, we are leveraging the equity holders' investments. Then we have also tax savings, which are also called tax shields. These tax shields come from the fact that interest payments are seen as expenses. So if you have an extra expense in the income statement, you will pay less taxes. So if you compare two companies with the same profit, but one has debt and the other doesn't, the one with debt will pay less taxes, so there will be a tax saving. And finally, we have better monitoring. If you have debt, and specifically if you have banks lending you money to the company, you will have another institution looking at the company. So the shareholders will like this because they know that the bank, the other investors, will also look at the company and will monitor what happens on the company, and maybe they will act on something. But then these are the positive sides, but we also have the negative side of debt, namely a higher risk. So with predetermined payments, it is mandatory for the company to pay those coupon payments, those interests. So there will be a higher risk. If for some reason the company is not able to pay interest, there will be a bankruptcy event. And then there will be costs and risks to the shareholders. This leverage, even though it may generate positive returns, it also turns equity holders into a more risky position. Then we have financial distress costs. If for some reason the company is becoming into a more difficult position, it will have these financial distress costs. Even with a low probability, even if this happens with a low probability, the fact that the company has debt will make the company spend some money in lawyers and in the process if there is a financial distress in the company, or it will pay to a better CFO, for example. So there will be financial distress costs even if there is only a tiny probability that this will happen. And then we have also agency costs. With debt, we will have different forces in the company. So even though it implies a better monitoring, it may also translate into a more difficult time in completing projects. If there are debt holders influencing the management, this can translate into projects that are done later. So this can slow down the process of investing, and this will imply some losses eventually. Okay, so all this together will change the value of the company, and at least theoretically we can build the graph of the value of the company as a function of leverage. So let's draw here a graph where we have here value, and on this axis we have leverage, which is given by debt to equity. Debt to equity is a measure of financial leverage, and we can plot the value as a function of leverage. And this here is the value unlevered. So this is the value of the company if it has no leverage. So if debt to equity is 0, there is no leverage. And then we know that with some debt, the impact of debt is positive. This here is residual, but this here is huge. So when we increase leverage, there will be an increase in the value of the company. But at some point, with so much leverage, these risks here are too high, and they start to offset the increase in the positive impacts. So at some point, there will be a decrease in value, and there will be an optimal value for the company, an optimal debt to equity, which will give you the maximum value that the company may have given its current assets. This will give you the optimal capital structure.